any of us are twisting on the on the divisional champions, but who of the four in the AFC would you waver over if there was a moment of doubt?
That's a good one.
I think the Jags are boom or bust. I mean, I'm going to go with the boom side of things, but I think you could make an argument that the Jags defense is terrible, that things fall apart, that they don't get the production out of Trayvon Walker, last year's #1 overall pick, and that ultimately they become, this year's Chargers, who end up losing games at 38, 34 and stuff like that. I think Trevor Lawrence takes jump, but to me it's banking on their defense. And in the Titans, you have Mike Vrabel. They're great coach, and despite all of their problems last year and the QB injuries that they had, they were there or thereabouts. It was only in that week 18 game that ultimately the Jags pulled it out of the bag. So I'm going to say it's boom, but I could well end up with egg on my face week 18 of the regular season.
Yeah, that was one I have to say that I did go back and forth a little bit on when we made the original picks. I didn't necessarily see enough of a case to jump and twist on the Jaguars and put the Titans in the driving seat there. But I think you get Tannehill back. I think you know what you got from him. Like the ceiling is certainly not as high as some of the megastars that we have in the quarterback position in the AFC, but the floor is much higher than most people. I think you get good solid play. A lot then depends on what Derrick Henry's 30 this season, is he? There's a lot of mileage on that clock. We know what he can do when he's at his very best. And they look a little bit better served on the wide receiver side as well. You're going to get that tough Titans defense. They're quite reliable there, and they're quite consistent. I think they will go as the Jaguars do or don't in a funny sort of way. I think if the Jaguars slip up at all, you can see the Titans taking that division. I'd still be confident enough in Peterson. I'm still very confident in Trevor Lawrence, who, in some ways we haven't talked about a huge amount in the offseason because there's been so much hype elsewhere and there's been so much else to talk about. But that's another exciting one. That's another guy that I'm really looking forward to watching this season, whatever way it goes. I think, as you've said, Colum, for me, it slightly worries me that they put themselves in the holes that they put them in. It excites me, obviously, that they found the ways to get out of them in the way that they did, particularly against the Chargers in the playoffs. But there is a flaw in that team, and I'm not sure, like you, that they've done quite enough to address it since the season ended up. Brian, what about you? Any that you'd waver on, or your poker face the whole way through?
I probably would waver on that one as well, but I have picked them by process of elimination. We've got two teams in the division with rookie quarterbacks, and you've got the Titans. And right now, nobody really knows what to expect from this Titans this year. If you were to ask anybody, give me 5 teams in the NFL who you just genuinely couldn't say yes or no to in terms of what they're going to do this year, the Titans would have to be one of those teams. If they get the pass rush back to what we saw a couple of years ago when they went #1 seed, even with an offense that's not an aggressive type of offense, I still think they could win a lot of games. But we really don't know. So I went through that particular division by process of elimination, and who's most likely to come out winning games, and that is Trevor Lawrence and the Jags. And for that reason, I'm going with them. So if you look at the other three, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Bengals, it would have to be the Jags that I'd be pulling the plug on. But I'll still run with them because I think the division is just not strong enough for anybody else to take it on from there.
Well, let's jump across to the other conference then and see what we have on the boards, Miss Ford. Colum, start with you. Like myself, you've gone with the Lions in the North. That's certainly the one that I'm probably the least confident in. Which is your least confident pick in the NFC among the division champions that you've called out there? We might go from least confident to most confident this time around, just to change it up.
Well, I just to say on the NFC side of things, I assume Brian is definitely going to be twisting, given he's gone with the creamsicle Tampa Bay Buccaneers tribute T-shirt. Is this a love of Tom Brady, who, if you saw Tom today appearing in the Manningcast ad, he unfortunately looks more and more like Pete Burns. We were all spun round and round when Tom Brady was with the Patriots, but my goodness, it is looking interesting for him. To me, it is the Lions, Connor, because I think I can make a case that the Vikings win the North, Packers win the North. I probably am much higher on the Vikings than a lot of people, but I don't think the players they lost are detrimental to this team. I think Dalvin Cook is not the Dalvin Cook that he once was. I think they moved on from Zadarius Smith, but I think Flores will make them much better. I think when you've Justin Jefferson, you have the outstanding wide receiver in the league. They took another wide receiver in the first round of the draft. I think Hawkinson, while it's a big contract, I think he's a complementary piece. And I think the Packers have a very good roster, and I think Jordan Love will be fine. I don't think he'll be terrible. I don't think he'll be brilliant. I think he'll be fine. And I think that with Matt LaFleur and the roster, I think they'll be very competitive. So the Lions are really going to have to earn it, but I think they are capable of doing that. And ultimately, it was the offensive coordinator's decision to stick around because he had options. He decided he'd stick around. I found that very telling. As you reflect on it and you look what they did in the draft, it makes a lot of sense. That's ultimately why I've decided to go with them. But they really will have to go out and win the division.
Yeah, I think a case for the for the defense, as you say, if you're going to stick with that pick, as I am, even though I slightly wavered on it, I wasn't sure whether I was more unsure of that or whether I was more unsure of the Falcons. 3 of the 4 of us have actually picked the Dirty Birds in the NFC South, which looks like the flakiest division of the lot on paper, and we're placing a lot of faith in Desmond Ridder as we go. Although probably more reflects our confidence in Arthur Smith than it does Desmond Ridder. With the Lions, you look at the way they reeled off those 10 wins last season, and they really looked like everything was finally coming together. And a lot of the wish casting that people were doing when they kind of fell in love with Dan Campbell from that Hard Knocks year was finally starting to come true or to manifest itself. And the Ben Johnson thing, I think, like you, Colum, I think is really interesting. He could have gone, and those opportunities to only 32 places on the carousel at the end of the day, the head coaching carousel, they don't come up that often, and Ben Johnson's stock was riding about as high as it could possibly do. Him sticking around, I think, is a real gesture of confidence in the culture that's being built there and in the playing staff that they now have and in the position they find themselves in, particularly with Rodgers now gone out of the division, which kind of opens it up in a big way. At the same time, what you're really wondering for me is, do you get the same level of play out of Jared Goff, and can it sing for a second season? Everybody goes and spends the offseason pouring over the tape, of course. And, the guys that kind of, the schemes that succeeded and the guys that succeeded last year don't necessarily carry it forward to the second year. And we'll see whether that goes quite as well as it did. Brian, for you, is there any divisional champ that you'd feel is over the trapdoor now, or that you're not as confident when you made the original pick?
It would be the Vikings. It's one I was talking about for quite some time. I think I've bought into the quarterback program, not necessarily the program in which you watch, but more so what we saw from Kevin O'Connell and the players within that organization throughout the course of last season. And I don't think that's changed. We were fortunate to have a recent interview, with Vikings players, and they did. He spoke about the fact that everyone's still bought into what he's doing and how he's a great coach. And I think the Flores thing, and Colum's rightly called out, a number of weeks ago, that Brian Flores coming in to replace a coordinator just couldn't get out of his own way last year, unfortunately, and the defense struggled. I think we're going to see an upside on that. So I don't think necessarily we're going to see the Vikings have to be in those type of 33-30 type of games and find ways to navigate victories when it looks like they've lost, like we saw so many times last year. I think we'll see them win games pulling away from teams this year. So it is a division which is going to be ultra competitive. I mean, I think the Bears are in for a reasonably good season as well. I know we kind of dismissed them as a team that's going to be down the bottom, but they have been quite aggressive in free agency. Certainly don't think they're ready to challenge for the title, but I think they can knock off teams within the division. I think we'll see more balanced results across the board for the 4 teams. And the Lions strike me as that team you're going to love to watch. You're going to love the witching hour when they're going up and down the field at 8:30 in the evening Irish time. But ultimately, they'll come out short in some of the games, and that's the Lions of old, and it'll still be exciting. But for me, I haven't even picked them to go to the playoffs, Conor. I've gone with the Vikings, and I've gone with the Packers.
I just realized as you say that, when we flash the graphic up for a second time there, I'm the only one who has the Vikings not making the playoffs, so I'm picking them to have a pretty precipitous fall off the cliff, but I stand by that. Colum, as we're talking about confident predictions, let's talk about which divisional champs are our absolute locks. We've all gone for the Eagles. Would you say that's the one you're most confident in?
Yeah, I think so. My only question really is around the offensive coordinator. I will say though, it's a big season in many respects for the Georgia defense, right? They're the best college defense we've ever seen, 2 years running. But those guys are really yet to make an impact in the league. Now, the Eagles obviously took a bunch, but plenty of other teams took them, and we're really looking for one of them to step up. I think Jalen Carter will, but ultimately replacing Hargrave is a big task. I don't think he'll be at that level. I think the Eagles will probably take, a step back this year a little bit, right? Especially, I don't think they'll win games as comfortably as they did last year. I think it'll be more competitive. I expect the NFC East to be more competitive. But they probably are, in terms of the divisional winners, I think they would be the one I would be most confident in.
Yeah, I wonder, as you're talking about the Harry Roseman halo effect, and he gets so much credit and deservedly so. But I think we're nearly at a point now where everybody expects every single move that he's made will work out absolutely fine, that everyone will step up, that all the draft picks will hit, that letting Hargrave go was the right decision, that everyone that's come in will light it up. And that's never going to be the case, right? Guys have a string of hits, and then there's bound to be a miss coming around the corner. So we'll see what happens. But I have to say, they're still the divisional champ I'd be most confident in picking. Brian, what about you?
No, I go with Saints. I think that South is very much there for the taking this year for the Saints. Bringing in Derek Carr, I've always been very high on him as a quarterback. We spoke on our live show about how his time in Vegas, Oakland, whatever you want to call it, from his previous time before they moved, that it came to a kind of a difficult ending for him and for the team in terms of how they kind of, I suppose, showed him the door. And I think he'll come out with a point to prove. And I think the division is very winnable. When you look at the Falcons, I know you have selected him, and I understand the nature of why they have an explosive-looking offense. We've got a rookie in Carolina, and we've got the Bucs, and we don't really know what this Bucs team, whether they're going to be in the sweepstakes for a quarterback come the draft time, or whether they play for the head coach. We're really not sure what to expect. But I do think the Saints are ready to make that step up again. I think Derek Carr will navigate a team to get into the playoffs and win this division. And I think if they do get into the playoffs, I think they can surprise a few people because they'll get a home game, and I don't think anybody will fancy going into New Orleans come January with that crowd behind them.
I love your confidence in the Saints, Brian, and it's been a constant theme of the off season. What do you feel about the coaching though? There, do you really think that Dennis Allen is the man to take them on?
I think his defensive skill set will bring this defense. We saw last year, this defense last year was ravaged with injuries, and like we touch wood, they don't get any injuries this year. But I think they've got a lot of experienced players defensively, and I think if they get back to the Saints of all defensively, and that's supposed to be his game, isn't it? Like he's not an offensive type of head coach. It's all about defense for him. And I think he'll have the measure of this team in the second year in terms of what he expects from them defensively. I think they'll be very strong as well. I think the likes of Lattimore, Cam Jordan are in for big seasons. And let's be fair, like the division it's not ultra competitive with all due respect. We don't think it's going to be. I think like it's a 9-win type of division for me. And I think they'll go over the 9 wins, but I think Dennis Allen will focus on getting this defense back to what Saints fans were used to seeing a couple of years ago, which was a really, really strong defense, complemented by an offense with Drew Brees at the time that was not Drew Brees of old.
Well, let's talk wildcard picks then. I don't think any of us have anyone else from the NFC South making the playoffs. I think we're picking that as pretty much a boom or bust division. Colum, of your wildcard picks, who's your dead cert?
It should be the 49ers. I mean, I'm the only one who doesn't have them as the divisional winner. It's 2019 was the last time the 49ers had a quarterback play a full season. Brock Purdy comes in with all sorts of questions to me, and he had major surgery. Can they keep him upright? that's ultimately it. I think also there are question marks on some of the other 49ers players regarding, the staying healthy. Like starters, fantastic, right? Outside of QB, where you'd hope Kyle Shanahan can work his magic, but what if Trent Williams picks up an injury? What if Kittle picks up an injury? What if Christian McCaffrey picks up an injury? I think that's probably the biggest question. And Christian McCaffrey has a history of them. Like Christian McCaffrey absolutely unlocked that offense when he came in last year. People kind of forget, like they were struggling. Then he came in and he absolutely took it to turbo drive. I mean, they went warp speed, but they didn't have a warp engine without him. And I don't know if he can stay healthy. That was why I knocked them down, because this is a league, you see injuries happen, the physical nature of it, and they have question marks. So ultimately that was the reason. But I think, yeah, they make the playoffs. But to me, that's why I ultimately went with the Seahawks. But they should be a lock for the playoffs.
Yeah, I cannot think of a better tandem for a rookie quarterback than to have George Kittle and then Christian McCaffrey in your backfield. Like you've someone who, as you made the comment about Megatron down there somewhere, you throw the ball up and you just know George Kittle has a great chance of getting it, even if it's not the most perfect throw. And we saw a few of those kind of questionable ones from Purdy last season that he kind of got away with. But when you got McCaffrey, you can just make magic happen and turn people in a phone booth in the backfield as well. It really helped his transition. And yeah, I'd stick with that division for my wild card lock as well. I was wavering as to whether the Seahawks could actually win the division. I certainly think they're going to make the playoffs. Brian, who's your NFC playoff banker? Wild card.
Difficult. Wild card. It's a difficult one. I see we're very aligned on this, Conor. So obviously, it's great to see that someone.
Well, spoiler alert. That's about to change.
Oh, brilliant! I can only imagine which one of us is getting kicked out. So at the moment, it's we've got the Seahawks, the Giants, and the Packers. Oh God, I was very high on the Seahawks throughout the course of the season. I'm not calling them my banker here. I'm going to give an argument as to why I would drop them. I spoke to a 49ers correspondent last week. He said to me, Gino got that contract for the first half of the season because if you watched him in the second half of the season in the games against the likes of the Panthers and various other games, he wasn't that good. And people are concerned that he might revert to the Geno Smith of old, and it won't be the one in which we saw last year with little expectation going into the season. Because, like, let's be fair, the stakes are high in Seattle now. Everybody in Seattle, a year on from where they were, now expects to seem to be back challenging. We speak about their defense, how stacked they are. They keep selecting players in the draft. That we touched on it earlier about with the Eagles. Everyone just assumes Howie Roseman's selections are going to, work out. Everyone's now assuming that Snyder's picks in Seattle are going to work out this season because of last year. We don't really know if that's the case. I'm still very confident on the Giants. I think the Giants are in for a good season. I think they will oust the Cowboys from last year's. And with the Packers, I think people are underwriting this team. I have no banker within those three. I couldn't genuinely give you one that I'm 100% convinced on. But I can give you an argument as to why all three of them will make the playoffs.
I gotta say, the one that I was most considering, I'm not actually going to twist now. I've done my one twist for the night, but the one I was most tempted to twist on was the Giants, and not because I'm not pretty high in the Giants. It's because I looked at the slate and thought it's a big call to say that the Cowboys are not going to make the playoffs, given all the talent that they have. Like I know there's huge question marks over Mike McCarthy, and we've talked again at length about the scapegoating of Kellen Moore, and I can see him being just fine in Los Angeles and justifying his name as an offensive coordinator when he gets his hands on Justin Herbert. But just that Cowboys defense, they're just so stacked. Whatever's happening on the other side of the ball, you can just see them hanging in games. I know the FTN fantasy algorithm has them as the team with the most projected wins, so it's a big call to omit them from the playoffs. But I just think there's something special happening in New York. Like if you're looking at coach versus coach, I don't know how you could pick McCarthy over Dayball. So I think Dayball will continue to find a way to help them win. There's an argument been made that they overachieved last year and they're going to regress this year. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I'm looking forward to seeing the Jones-Waller connection. I think Waller was a great acquisition for them, and I think I'm just about on balance going to stick with them. But like you, I find it hard to bank on anyone. Colum, is there anyone that you're wavering on?
I have huge concerns around the Cowboys' weapons because Brian and I have discussed who's going to run the ball. Like that's my biggest concern. But ultimately, if the Giants coaching staff had this Cowboys roster, God knows what they would be capable of. To me, I just think and I've said it, I think Daniel Jones is the biggest limiting factor. If Brian Daboll had something else to work with, I would be a lot higher. I think Wink will be fantastic. I think this will be an absolute bloodbath of a division. They'll all take wins off each other. But Micah Parsons is a monster. He truly is. And that ultimately is what I went with, that the Cowboys might have enough in the passing game that they probably, are not as maybe expensive as they once were. But I think moving on, I think Zeke signing a contract with another team was the best thing to happen, because it means Jerry can't bring him back and insert him.
But it opens the way for Deuce Vaughn as the number 2 running back. That's going to be the feel-good story of the season. Like, who could forget the tears in the draft room when his dad was able to sign the card and call out the pick for the first time ever. It actually cast Jerry Jones in something of a sympathetic light. It was actually a nice moment. Let's see what Deuce can do for the Cowboys and whether he can run the ball for them as the backup or the number